Great. Look, thank you everybody for making time to join with us today and to be part of the webinar. We have a pretty exciting Filed Live webinar coming up today, really covering the key elements of Microsoft Copilot and RecordPoint. So without further ado, let's get underway. I'd really like to welcome and thank very much Microsoft for being part of our conversation today. We have Sina Rao, who is a partner lead at Microsoft, here to present with us. Sina, did you want to say hello to everybody before we get underway and introduce yourself briefly?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anthony. I'm Sneha Rao. I'm a partner solution architect that works across Asia for our partners, focusing on modern work and specifically Copilot.
Fantastic. It's great. So I'm really thank you very much for making some time and coming along and talking with us all today. We also have Simon Thompson, who is one of RecordPoint's product managers and one of our product managers who focus very deeply in AI. Would you like to say hello, Simon?
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. So yeah, I'm Simon Thompson. I'm a product manager here at RecordPoint. I'm working across our AI suite of products, and I'll be discussing AI governance and how you can de-risk your AI projects with good governance.
Fantastic. Thanks, Simon. Great. So the presentation today is very much focused on Copilot, and I think as we deep dive into that and the governance for Copilot, we asked Sina to really give us an overview of what's happening in the Copilot space, a bit of an introduction. Sina, I'd love for you to lay out what Microsoft's really seeing and what are the core agendas there.
Brilliant, thanks. If we can move to the next slide. Lovely to be here with you all today. I wanted to take the opportunity first to, showcase to you the breadth of Copilot experiences across the ecosystem, which essentially is designed to enhance productivity and user engagement by leveraging AI-powered tools and integrations. As we go across this wheel and how Microsoft Copilot is embedded across the Microsoft ecosystem, we have, firstly, modern work. And you guys are probably all familiar with modern work. By the way, if you see me moving my head from one screen to another, it's because you guys are on two screens of mine. So I am still fully engaged. So firstly, we have modern work, where Copilot is integrated into Microsoft 365 applications such as Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, Teams, Loop, OneNote, and the Microsoft 365 chat, to name a few. It essentially helps users draft emails, generate reports, create presentations, analyze data, all the tools that we're all familiar with that we use for our basic productivity in any information worker role. So it allows us to be productive with meetings, with features like intelligent recap, but essentially the integration with these Microsoft 365 apps is really there to enhance productivity, efficiency, by providing real-time assistance and insights. We then move over to business applications in this flywheel, and you'll see that these are all Copilots that are integrated with our Dynamics 365 applications, such as customer relationship management, enterprise resource planning, something our field sales roles will benefit greatly with, which automates really some of our sales processes and customer interactions. We then move over to the developer experience within the flywheel, and that's pretty much Copilot integrated into Visual Studio, GitHub, providing our developers with code suggestions, debugging assistance, document generation, for example, and help developers write code faster, identify and fix errors, and maintain code quality more efficiently. And these Copilot's AI-driven insights enhance the development process and reduce the time spent on repetitive tasks, whether it is within our low-code Power Platform environment or the more extensive GitHub. We then move into our operating system, and you've got Windows 11 tools such as Clipchamp, Paint Photos, or the more extensive security tools such as Sentinel Defender or Intune, which our security Copilot provides assistance with. And it's all about helping navigate the operating system more efficiently and providing personalized recommendations based on usage patterns and security enhancements. Browser and search, I think this was one of the first ones that was released and customers most familiar with, which was essentially Copilot integrated within our Edge, Microsoft Edge and Bing, enhancing the browsing and search experience. And finally, data and AI, where we have Microsoft Azure AI and machine learning capabilities, providing advanced data analytics and insights, helping users analyze large data sets, build predictive models, and generate data visualizations. Copilot integration with Azure ensures that users can enhance the power of AI to drive data-driven decision making. And in addition to this, Copilot in Fabric offers a range of features designed to enhance productivity and streamline data analysis and visualization. So that kind of just gives you a very brief overview of our entire Copilot experience. As we move to the next slide, what Microsoft has also done is run work trend index surveys across 1,000 people in 31 countries with labor and hiring trends from LinkedIn as well as productivity patterns from Microsoft 365 to understand what is it that our users and organizations want. 3 findings that stood out specifically was 1, employees want AI at work and they won't wait for companies to catch up, which opens up a loophole of employees using whatever free tools that are available if the organization is not going to provide the capability. Second was the rise of AI power user, which really what it does is understand, let organizations an insight around how they can use AI to empower their people. And finally, for employees, AI raises a bar. It breaks the career ceiling, and it also gives employers an opportunity to hire for potential as opposed to experience a lot of the times. So if digging deeper into these, when we go into AI has come to work. So essentially, employees are not going to wait for their company to adopt AI. It's come to work. 75% of knowledge workers we surveyed said they use AI tools at work, with usage nearly doubling over the last 6 months, about 46%. For every professional, AI could be the edge required to get ahead in the job market. Employers have moved beyond just looking for AI technical talent. They want to know who is using AI, no matter what their function is. 79% leaders say they would not hire someone without AI skills, and 79% of leaders say they'd rather hire a less experienced candidate with AI skills than a more experienced candidate without. And our global average on that is about 71%. So digging just a little bit deeper into Microsoft 365 Copilot, what I really want to make sure is everyone understands it's Copilot, not autopilot. It's your AI assistant at work, which means it does certain tasks for you and removes the drudgery from work, essentially, but it doesn't execute. So it can't say send an email. It can draft an email for you, given certain vectors and parameters within your prompt, but it cannot send an email for you as such. So it's important to understand that it doesn't get to the execution layer. It does everything up until that. As I delve into the next slide, it's important. We have a lot of questions around how it works. Copilot combines the power of large language models with your data in the Microsoft Graph, which is your calendar, your emails, your data, your chats, your documents, your meetings, and more, and the Microsoft 365 applications, which I mentioned previously, to turn your words into the most powerful productivity tool on the planet, combined with the power of the web. Copilot isn't just a better way of doing the same thing, it's an entirely new way of working, which is adoption requires different ways to encourage the people. It is creating new habits and creating new ways of search. Compared to what we're used to with Google, for example. If I go further into the security features, it actually is an enterprise-ready security platform. It uses our M365 security models and uses the 4 security principles of compliance, privacy, responsible AI, and enterprise-grade security to actually bind all of your data. So if I look at M365 Copilot, it is one of the most secure ways to try and drive AI power to your knowledge workers. Here is some information available. I'm not going to read through these. This is just some information ready and available for you. If you're looking as an organization on how to get ready for Copilot, I inserted this slide in just to make sure you have access to some of this when you get the slide pack later on. In the next slide, as I say, these are some things you need to think about when you're trying to optimize your organization's data for Copilot in terms of permissions and information labeling, data sensitivity, informational labeling along those contexts. So this is all content that's very rich, but available for you to consume in your own time. I also wanted to say there is another additional power in Copilot when it comes to Copilot Studio. As such, and the extensibility of Copilot integrations within your line of business applications. What Microsoft has done is recently announced some new connectors that you can actually use out of the box with Copilot Studio. So you can grab Copilot with data from across Graph, from Power Platform, Fabric, Dataverse, as well as some third-party connectors for SaaS applications, Adobe, Atlassian, ServiceNow, Snowflake, and a few more. So if these are some of the line of business applications you use and you want Copilot extensibility across these, instead of you having to work from scratch, there are some connectors you can leverage. Understanding that Copilot, 3 essentials for Copilot success. One, you need executive sponsorship and executive buy-in and executive use, to be very honest, and AI strategy that aligns with the business strategy. 2, you need to really look at how you're going to do the human-centered change. We've been searching through keywords with Google since the late 90s. Got to change that because that's not how Copilot works. So there are different behaviors at play that need to come into force. And it takes roughly 28 days of doing the same thing again and again repetitively for a new habit to establish. So having that human change element is really important for Copilot, especially Copilot for M365 and technical readiness. And by that, I mean securing your data infrastructure, information protection and labeling, data sensitivity, making sure the right people have right access. And I think technical readiness goes hand in hand with adoption. And finally, what Microsoft has put together is a Copilot Success Kit, which pretty much addresses a lot of what I have just spoken about in terms of how you get ready as an organization, in terms of a technical readiness guide, Copilot adoption guide for business leaders, user enablement guide, which would help you with the human-centered change. So it'll be really important for you to kind of have a look at that. Another thing to consider is with Viva Insights, you can look at your Copilot adoption rate and measure its success across all of the Microsoft 365 Copilot applications and see where do you need to tweak a little bit to drive further adoption across the ecosystem. And I think that's me.
Thank you, Sina. That was an amazing overview of Copilot and Microsoft, and I'm sure there's a bunch of questions to come up shortly. If we just dive in, building on top of the overview there in Copilot, there are some considerations from a risk perspective, really thinking about how these bits all fit together. So, we know at Recordpoint we're building on Copilot and building on a lot of the amazing features that's talked about around how you think about these things and bring those capabilities together. And for us at Recordpoint, it's very much a better together story with Microsoft and those capabilities. But we at Recordpoint also know there is a series of regulatory and legislative and other controls that you need to have in place, and those are evolving all the time. So if you were to look at those that haven't had a chance, I'd encourage you to take a look. The European Union put together some fairly good legislation around the new AI Act in the EU, and we'll put a link to that in the chat here shortly. But it's really based on the core principles you see on the screen here, the 5 that are there. So what are the bias and fairness, and how do you consider those biases and fairnesses of the AI itself? How do you deal with misinformation and deep fakes, and what does that mean? And, as Sina said, detailed, that's not a big issue with Copilot because we already have a lot of the plumbing that deal with those problems in the solution. How do we think about privacy and explainability across that tool set? And what are the security risks that come inherent with those processes? And what's really nice is I think that as we bring all of this content together, there's a really good proposition there about how we deal with each of these elements and how we build on these particular risk factors. The final risk factor, and one that we think at Recordpoint is something for organizations to get on with right now, is to look at data diversity. And there is an interplay here between data diversity, bias and fairness, and potentially even a security risk. You look at what happened in Medibank and Optus and some of the other breaches. The over-retention of data and the mismanagement of data has some serious implications for how all AI tooling will throw things out, but in Copilot included in that context. So what we think about at Recordpoint, and we've worked very closely with the folk at Microsoft and other places on, is really thinking about these 2 approaches to how you can come to the new legislation. You're aware, for those that are in the US, the Biden administration has put out a series of executive orders around the use of AI and what are the guide rails. We're seeing some similar things here in Australia where I'm sitting today. And I mentioned the EU legislation before. These two models allow us to conceptualize those regulatory requirements and apply them to a Copilot or other AI solution, but very much integrated with the Copilot experience. And in fact, as I said, built on the Copilot experience. So model one is really providing additional human in the loop controls to how your Copilot is operating and how we're querying it and how we're thinking about the models and explainability. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's effectively having an understanding of what's in the model at any particular time, being able to recordize that from an evidentiary perspective, and therefore have knowledge of the kind of prompts that are going through the model, what is the traceability of the elements of that model, and therefore what data is in that. So you're really providing additional depth of governance from a control perspective, again, to meet the various regulations. What is the bias? What is the level of privacy data in there? How are we tagging that through? The second model, the second capability we really think about is to take, in some ways, those same things, but down another level. How do you curate the data across these capabilities? How do you check for redundant, obsolete, and trivial data? How do you normalize that data to improve the AI experience? And there's some data recently from a CIO article I was reading saying that one of the largest concerns that CIOs have in the enterprise is how are they able to curate their data beyond an M365 and other data, file shares, other locations that they want to use for bringing into Copilot, but they're very concerned about the privacy elements, the monitoring required, the ability to fix inconsistencies. We really need to curate those things. All of this, from a record point perspective, is to draw this all back down to have the ability for humans to audit the traceability. It really gives you that defensibility when you think about AI and the utility of AI, so you have those protections of what's happening in your deal room, what's happening in the transactions with your stakeholders. How do we record that? How do we provide provenance to that and bring that together? So to drive into that a little more deeply, Simon is going to take us through the data considerations, the different aspects of the controls that are required, and what is available in the tooling. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks very much, Anthony. So before any kind of AI governance actions can be initiated, the first thing we'll need to do is actually find our data and make sure that we can search through and understand the data. So if we go through to the next slide, the problem here is that your data is typically going to exist in many different source systems, and there's going to be a lot of it. Often there's going to be tens of millions of files, which are potential candidates for use in AI products, and it can be quite a chaotic state of affairs. So to begin with, we'll need to gather this data and unify it into a single system so that you can lay the groundwork for finding and then curating what you do need to add to that AI product. So that's going to involve connecting into those individual source systems, whether it's SharePoint or OneDrive, or it might be somewhere like a network file share. And then centralizing that data into a single platform, and then it can be standardized and worked with across all of those different sources. So this allows you to view and search within all of those different source systems through a single pane of glass. And without this step, you're working across multiple systems with no standardization, no uniformity in naming conventions or how things are structured, and no way to visualize this data across the different sources, essentially leaving you in the dark as to what you've got to work with. So by unifying that data, you're able to take that chaotic data estate and bring it into a more well-organized state. So once we've centralized our data and we've made it searchable and we can actually use it, the next step we'll want to take is to curate what data will ultimately be used in those AI products. And there are several factors that we'll need to take into account. So firstly, over on the left here, we'll need to assess the data for sensitivity and privacy. So for example, it will often be the case that personally identifiable information, or PII, should be left out of the data set. And that's to protect an individual's privacy for obvious reasons. So this step's vital in mitigating potential legal risks and ensuring compliance with data protection regulations. Flagging financial and confidential information, such as credit card numbers, would be another example of this, where we don't want any of that information making its way into an AI product's input data set so that it can be ultimately output by the AI. Secondly, we'll need to assess the quality of our data. So this means evaluating its usefulness. Does the data actually contribute to the goals of our AI product, or is it redundant? Using low quality data can compromise the accuracy and effectiveness of AI models. So that's going to lead to low quality outputs, and that's going to potentially damage the trust of your stakeholders. If you're like me, when you start playing around with some of these AI platforms and you notice that some of the outputs are getting unusable, or you're getting untrue, hallucinated outputs, the trust in that system drops fairly rapidly. And in my own personal experience, there are plenty of those AI tools out there that I just don't use anymore, because I simply don't know if I can trust those outputs given what they've given me before. And then thirdly, we have ethical considerations. So we need to ask ourselves whether the use of certain data is justifiable. Was it necessary or ethical to collect and use that data in the first place? An example of this would be data that might not be sensitive, quote unquote, in and of itself in terms of the contents of the data, but it might pertain to or belong to individuals who are under the age of 18, which means we just shouldn't be using it regardless of its content, generally speaking. Another example of this would be around purpose limitation. And by that, I mean, are we using the data for the same purpose that a customer provided consent for? So the data that we collect should be used only for a specific legitimate purpose for which it was originally gathered. It's unethical as well as just illegal in many circumstances to use data for anything other than those purposes. So it's important that we have those considerations in mind when we're building our AI products. If we go to the next slide, I can talk about some of the impacts of, so if we don't do some of those things that I talked about on the last slide, what happens? So in short, it can have very severe consequences. The first to mention would be legal ramifications. So as I mentioned before, it's simply against the law in certain jurisdictions to expose or use someone's personal data without their consent, especially if it's very sensitive data, like medical information, for example. So depending on your jurisdiction, and especially in places like Europe, this can have incredibly large penalties and fines associated with it. It can also result in reputational damage. So if you imagine what happens to a company's reputation when they go through a data breach, for example, you're going to see very similar consequences here as well, and perhaps even worse. So in a data breach scenario, the malicious actor has to hack into the system and reveal that data, and that puts a lot of accountability on them. There's also a lot of accountability on the organization, obviously. But in the case of an AI product revealing that same information, in the public's perception, it's as if you created something that voluntarily gave up their data. It did all of the hard work that a malicious actor would usually need to do and created the same result of that sensitive data being compromised, which, as you can imagine, would cause you to seriously reconsider ever trusting that company again. Which segues into this last point, which is the financial impact of poor AI governance. If you have customers and prospective customers not being able to trust you with their data, and you have a poor reputation in their eyes, that's going to lead to customers churning or just never choosing to do business with you in the first place. And that's obviously going to have a huge effect on the bottom line and the shareholder value of the organization, not to mention any of the fines that could be imparted on the company, which I talked about before. And those can be very, very significant depending on your jurisdiction. So with all of that put together, what you're actually starting to see, and Anthony kind of alluded to this before, is people are just hitting pause on their AI projects because they understand the implications of getting this wrong and the damage that they can do to their brand and their bottom line. So I was reading this article the other day where a fairly rough poll was taken of 20 chief data officers, and half of them had done just that, hit pause, because they didn't have a good governance initiative in place to ensure that they could mitigate these risks, which kind of shows you, just how important governance is, and also how early we are in this cycle where people don't have those initiatives in place yet. So to wrap up this section, we've explored the foundational steps in AI governance. So discovering and preparing your data, and then curating it with, putting that careful attention on sensitivity, quality, and ethical considerations. These are all crucial steps when building AI products that are compliant and trustworthy and effective. So by ensuring your data is well prepared and thoughtfully curated, you're laying the groundwork for AI initiatives that not only meet your organizational goals, but also uphold the values and trust that your stakeholders expect. So with that, I'll hand back over to you, Anthony.
That's a great point there, Simon, and thank you for that presentation. We really think at Recordpoint around how you close the loop here. There's this amazing technology that Sina spoke about in Copilot, and there's a lot of capabilities out of the box. How do you close the loop to think about the entirety of the data estate, bringing back together, structured and unstructured data, thinking about how to govern, things that may be well designed and put together and packaged with the other data sets? And how do you then also think about the overlay of the regulations? Because what we have seen is it is difficult for enterprises to get started and answer these questions, but there's some amazing guidance from Microsoft. And what we think you can do is you can close the loop on top of that guidance to answer these questions about those regulatory controls using some of the capabilities that we put into the product working alongside Microsoft. How do you create that traceability from data to provenance to prove something from an e-discovery perspective, from an output perspective in these models? So let's take something simple. We've been working with a particular event that has some concerns around producing biases in content around resumes. So the resumes are sitting in platform. We want to tag out the capabilities to understand across all the people that have applied, are we going to generate a bias in the model because we've asked a particular question about the sort of candidates we're getting through that process. So we want to think about the inputs from all of our different sources, as Simon said, so we can curate the data across structured and unstructured into the model. There's no need to centralize this data. It can be done in place. And again, building on top of the amazing framework that Copilot has, we have all of that out of the box. But we now want to curate that last point around how do we understand the biases that were there, observe them, because all models have biases, that's just built in, and ensure that it's noted. And it's, we've done everything in effect to withdraw that bias or understand it. And that's really where you can look to additional tooling to provide the additional context of those things, that framework of governance that gets you to the closed loop, the ability to have a look at the prompts that are going through the system and also record those, the ability to record the answers effectively to those. So you have that traceability against what's occurring within your Copilot. And then answering some of those questions that Simon has raised around what is the data, how does it apply to the particular circumstances that you want to run through. So we're announcing today a new capability we're bringing to market. It is built on top of Microsoft Copilot. So it is fully integrated. This is an example sort of screen of how it comes across, but it actually can exist inside your Copilot as well. It's what we're calling RexPod. And so RexPod is going into beta, but gives you the fully curated PII structured set of capabilities built on Copilot instances. Everything has traceability through to citations. So what are the documents that made up the particular response that a RexPod might give you across your data set, but also intermixing that data with the thousands of different connectors we have out of the box, looking at what's in Workday, looking at what's in file shares, pulling that data into Copilot and having that experience. So there's a lot of depth there. Today's not a session on that deeply, but it is a way to solve this problem across the plethora of applications you have in the enterprise and get value knowing that you have that level of curation, provenance, traceability in the rollout process you might have. And then again, that will surface in all of the places you're seeing Copilot, should you want to extend it out that far, or it can extend in more narrow circumstances. So core capabilities, and we think something very interesting for a number of our customers already in a beta mode with it. On top of the closing of the loop of that product, though, we do think you need to think about some things, and aligns, I think, very heavily with the workbooks and other detailed material Sina pointed to, is to really plan your usage and what your outputs are. Do some simulations. Have an AI governance group that's going to manage the capabilities here. Look at the kind of problems that you're going to hit, and what is the cycle of innovation where we can do this risk reduction using tooling to understand the data set and the curation there, and then also going ahead and putting policies in place to handle the interactions and recordize those interactions as per the various pieces of legislation that are flowing through the pipe. And we're new in this space. We're all still learning together. So we're going to see the regulators and the legislation in this space continue to evolve in ways that we may not have even dreamt of yet. We need to make sure that we're compliant with. So it just ensures we have accountability of the organization across the policy application, and we've got effectiveness in those controls. When we close the loop, we do need to think about things from a few different perspectives. What are the prompts that are occurring? Again, there are some awesome pieces of Copilot that will capture that and give you heuristics. But how do I match that to other searches, other known data sources inside your enterprise, and bring all of that together so that I can present that in an evidentiary form, for a litigation, for a particular output. So you do need to close the loop around understanding the prompts, understanding the data sources, the connection between the data sources and the answers to those prompts. And then what is the element of knowledge and citation that's occurring to give you traceability and explainable AI, should you need that at some point. So you've got these ways of then governing and managing that, managed within those processes, and we understand the context of it. So what's next? And again, I encourage you to go have a look at this deck and the links that Microsoft have provided. We think at Record Point, building on top of that, some ways to deal with your AI committees, to deal with the enterprises and concerns out there about how you can build that rollout and feel safe in that rollout. So firstly, start piloting and using and playing with Copilot. It is, we've talked a lot, and I come from a legal perspective myself. We talk a lot about risk at Record Point. It's what we do. We believe we're really experts at it. But the reality is, there is a reward here. So go and use Copilot and get that reward. We can offset the risk by doing some really smart things, but it's really important to start piloting. The risk is manageable. We need to consider the different governance models around how we want to manage it. Not all code, when we say Copilot, and I'm sure there's a question I've already seen in the chat, and we can have Sina explain it in more detail. Copilot is many things. What the experience you have in Microsoft 365 is a little different to the experience you have building your own Copilot model and using that other tooling Microsoft has there. Those are similar at the back end, but different experiences in terms of how you build those. So consider what are the different applications you have and how you want to govern those. And what is the tooling you want to put in place to help with that governance, to realize that value. Think about your policies. The policies are relatively easy to put together, and they don't need to be War and Peace here, but they do need to have some linkage, I think, back to the legislation and the regulations. And there is a series of white papers in Australia, in the US, and in the EU that are available on our website that link off to other authorities that have created them around what are the guardrails you should be thinking about. Simon touched on a few of them. There's ethical considerations. What are we doing with data about children? How do we isolate that data about children? What are we doing about PII data? Maybe there are segments of PII data we don't want in the model for various reasons. There are other considerations we want to make, particularly around data that has large implications on consent and those sorts of elements. So there are guardrails to be constructed and understood about your stakeholders. And then lastly, the underpinning of all of this is still good data lifecycle management. We need to make sure that the better curated the data is, the models are going to be better. Now, the models are very good at curating the data out where there is an obsolete and trivial data, but they're not perfect. And so the better we can make that landscape, the better the outcome is going to be. So we need to go back to the basic principles: data retention, analysis, even tagging content out that is low value. Having the T-Tower roster, having the kitchen roster in your high-end Copilot instance might not be all that useful. It might be very useful depending on your organization, but there are certain types of data that really doesn't need to be inside there that we can hive off and carve off. So we want to think about the data lifecycle and those processes because it does underpin all of this. And we want to do that data lifecycle not just in traditional structured systems, the traditional ECM landscape. We want to do it in unstructured systems as well. And there are plenty of tools out in the market now to help with that. So think about those things, start by piloting. If you're not using it today, get on and start using it. There is a lot of value here. So With that, I just wanted to note, if you do want to talk more deeply with our team here at Oracle Point, my details link are available, but also Jesse, who is one of our key players, able to, if you want to see more on the RecSpot, if you want to actually get a lot more detail and talk to some of the governance processes, Jesse's details are here to go in and have that more deeper conversation. But we would love to now hand over to you to answer your questions you may have, dive in anything that you feel we've missed. We have a couple of questions. What if centralizing data is too expensive and difficult to achieve? What repositories are you recommending for centralization? And do you mean structured and unstructured data together? What if one of the existing data sets in the well-governed state, e.g. in a designed and used ECM, are you recommending exporting that out as well? I think that was in response to you, Simon.
Yeah, it's a good question. So in terms of what data you should use and which sources should you be looking at, it's where the valuable information is going to be. So I would say, in response to what you were saying before, all of the above, if there's valuable information in network file shares or structured sources or unstructured sources, and that's going to produce a good AI product, then that should all be considered. Now, obviously, that needs to be traded off with the resource requirement of connecting to those systems and bringing it into a central location where you can do all of that. But generally speaking, that's how I'd be thinking about that.
Thanks, Simon. I think, again, a lot of the research and R&D that's been done in this space is how do you create an in-place system to manage this data and then surface it up. Sina, there's a few questions there, and I know you did answer it in the chat around budget and linking that to.
Yes, so I have answered it in the chat. There are some good resources such as a business value calculator that you can use in the terms of trying to find budget for Copilot specifically. There's some data from a work trend index perspective around how much productivity time savings we've got per month, per user, that can justify how you reallocate resources. And depending on the organization, there can be really additional thought put around what are the different products used. An introduction of Copilot means which products no longer need to be used. And therefore, that consolidation of products as such can give licensing benefits overall. And that's an angle most organizations forget. But there are a lot of, we don't need, as part of leveraging that Microsoft 365 suite of applications, there's some other productivity applications we use within an organization that no longer are needed now, because using Copilot makes it easier to use these applications, for example. So that in itself is another way to kind of try and articulate that funding. And I would also say having the right people in your pilot group who can advocate for the efficiencies for Copilot specifically is really, really important. Because if you don't, then there isn't a use case there. So having people who either have access to the purse strings or can influence those who have access to purse strings extensively are great people to have in your pilot group to then cross that budget. In terms of use case, Microsoft again has done quite a bit of work around what is a finance person? How can a finance person benefit from Copilot? And what does a day in a life look like for a finance person? What does a day in a life look for a marketing person, for example? And all of that collateral can be used. I think it's in the Copilot Success Kit for you to leverage anyway. And that helps specifically in terms of putting those use cases together. But I would always say that every organization would like to think that they're unique and special, and their marketing person isn't the same as the marketing person in another organization, or their product manager isn't the same as the product manager in another organization. So spending the time, maybe using what content is available by Microsoft that you can leverage as a template to start with, rather than starting with the plain canvas, but using that to then work with the organization to customize that template in a way that they feel special, so they don't feel like you've sold them an IKEA product, so to speak. It's really important, right? Because that's where you're going to harness the value. It also helps you understand the business processes effectively. So whatever we might have put from a generic standpoint would be great as a start, but moving that extra mile with them based on their unique situation would give you additional efficiencies that you otherwise would not have captured. So those are my two nuggets. In terms of customer stories, I think there's another question on any Australian customer stories. Let me see what I can find and see whether I can put a link in. Remember, this is fairly new, right? It was early EAP, available as part of EAP about a year ago. and it was available for under 300 users only in February of this calendar year. The best customer story I can give you from an Australian standpoint, to be very honest, is one of my partners, and it's Telstra. They were in EAP and they've gone publicly and announced that they're going to deploy 21,000. They've purchased 21,000 Copilot for M365 licenses to deploy through the organization. If that's not a story to talk about, I don't know which one is. Going from 300 licenses to 21,000 is a significant investment. And if they didn't see value in it, especially in light of some of the redundancies that are happening and organizational restructure that's happening, I don't know what else you can see value with. So yeah, that's my 2 bits for now.
Thank you, Sina. We have another question there. From a data management perspective, what are your thoughts around high risk, high value management as opposed to focusing on life cycle? Simon, you want to pick that up?
So if I've understood the question correctly, we're sort of talking about a trade-off between risk and quality, I suppose, if there is such a trade-off to speak of. So what I think we're kind of looking at now is how I think this will evolve over time is there's probably a bit of a, I don't want to say cowboy attitude, but let's just go with that, a cowboy attitude to creating AI products to some degree. And you see this with things like, I think it was Getty image watermarks showing up in the outputs of certain AI products. And so, those obviously just shouldn't have made their way into the AI product to begin with. But then you can go too far the other way. And so what I expect we're going to see is some lawsuits come out of that. We're seeing AI governance become a much more popular topic. And so it'll probably start going the other way. Now, the most effective way to ensure that you don't have an inappropriate or unethical or illegal output come out of the AI is to not put any data in it to begin with. That's obviously not the right answer as well. So you can imagine, examples where you need to create I heard this example the other day, a medical diagnosis bot. You need to put in medical diagnosis in there, and that's kind of a bit of a fraught territory. But to make that AI product useful, we're going to need to, ensure that we have some good data and potentially sensitive data in there as well, which is just something that we need to work around. So I think we're going to see this evolution of, going one way, then perhaps the pendulum swinging pretty far the other way, and then we'll find this kind of happy equilibrium around, what that correct balance is of balancing risk and quality of the product. So apologies if I've misunderstood the question, but that's what I'd say on that.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, Simon, I think there's a good answer from one perspective. There's, I think, a different perspective that the high risk, high value equation is around how do you work out the areas and the business function that content needs to apply to. So one of the things that we've done in our RecSpot pilot is allow you to narrow in to high value content. We can talk about it there, but it allows you to create a portal for HR, for instance. And we want to look at what are the high risk, high value elements that belong to the HR function. How does that get expressed in Copilot? How do we limit it to the types of things the HR function needs? And how do we think about then the data curation that lives within those portal dynamics and what that traceability is? So it isn't just about lifecycle. Lifecycle is one way to dispose of data and to delete and remove data and prune data. But there are other types of collation where we're bringing that data up in, to be stronger examples of use or stronger examples of utility in that process. And again, I think there's a whole other webinar that we no doubt are planning, really focusing on that. But fantastic question, Susan, really appreciate it. We had another question. Simon, do you want to talk to the particular uses of AI in general?
Yeah, for sure. So there's kind of two ways that we're thinking about this, or two kind of general categories. So one is what we've been primarily talking about through this presentation, which we could call AI governance, or another way to think of it would be like AI enablement. So how do we help our customers build their own AI products and use AI more effectively? So that's one kind of general bucket. The other kind of general bucket is how we at Record Point improve our own workflows and improve our own product using AI tools. So if you think of some of the core functionalities of Record Point, we've got classification, search, just an analysis or visualization. All of those things can be drastically improved using AI tooling. So if we think of something like AI search, whereas previously you would use something like keyword search, generally speaking, now we have, AI powered semantic search, where I could, instead of saying the title equals this and the author equals this, I can just say, like in that RecSpot example that Anthony was showing, how much PII do I have in SharePoint? How many documents do I have with PII in SharePoint? And I can just write that exactly as I said it in natural language. And AI is going to sort of help the system understand exactly what it needs to surface. Another example would be, analysis and visualization. You may have seen a lot of these tools. I believe OpenAI or ChatGPT has a version of this where you can give it a data set and you can just say, show me the proportion of, let's use PII again, PII and PCI records I have, and it would just, show a pie chart of, what the proportions of that data is. Again, classification. So we have, current capability with classification intelligence where you can, provide an AI model, here's 50 invoices. This is what invoices look like in our context. The next time it sees an invoice, it goes, okay, well, based on what I know about invoices that you've shown me, I think there's a 90% chance that that's an invoice over there. And so with that, you can really, really scale up the amount of data that you can classify at scale and ensure you're meeting kind of compliance requirements around classification, and then going into data retention and data lifecycle management. So those are just a few examples. There are many more, but that tends to be how we think about it. So AI enablement, how do we help our customers create AI products, and then how we're using AI within Record Point itself to better improve our workflows.
Thank you, Sina. Thank you, Simon, for participating and talking to us today, particularly Sina from the Microsoft side. Lovely to have you along. Love to have you along to more Filed Live. Great presentation, and thank you for going through that. Thank you all for listening. We appreciate the questions. If you have more questions, we'll be circulating contact details for all of us here. Happy to do that. And thank you for coming along to the Filed Live. I hope to see you again next time and you found this useful. Thank you.